Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our session, Sustainable and Inclusive Global Learning. My name is Meghan Zahniser, Executive Director of ASHE, and thrilled to be joining you all today. I would encourage folks to say hello to us and where you're dialing in from in the chat. Again, my name is Meghan. I'm the Executive Director of ASHE. ASHE is the Association for the Advancement of Sustainability in Higher Education. And today I am joining you from the native land of the Lenape people, which since colonization is more widely known as Philadelphia, which is on the East Coast of the United States. And it would be great to hear who's joining us today. So again, if you want to introduce yourselves in the chat and tell us who you are and where you're dialing in from today, that would be lovely. And I'll just give you a little bit of an outline of what we're going to be doing for the next hour, perhaps a little bit less than that. We're going to first do a little bit of round of intros. You'll hear from our fantastic speakers today. But first, we're just going to start with intros. Then we're going to hear from each of their unique perspectives as it relates to sustainable and inclusive global learning. Then after we hear from each of them, we're going to have some discussion. We're going to have some compelling questions, really sort of thought-provoking and encouraging everyone here to be exploring a bit more deeply what it means to have sustainable and inclusive global learning. So that is sort of the outline for what we're trying to do today. But I did just want to give everybody who's participating here a sense of who we are on this panel. So I'll start and then I'll ask my colleagues here to share a little bit of an intro. For those of you who might not be familiar with ASHE, ASHE is a nonprofit organization primarily based in North America, but we do have a global presence and we support anyone in higher education that's looking to understand or advance sustainability. Much of the time I'm immersed in conversations around integrating sustainability in the curriculum, engaging faculty, staff, and students in sustainability and climate action, and considering the breadth and depth of sustainability and how justice and equity really are at the center of that. So it's for all of those reasons, I feel very at home at the Sustainability on the Go conference that is raising really important questions and creating dialogue around sustainability and inclusivity, local and community engagement, local and global community engagement, among a number of other topics. So again, for the next hour, we have the privilege of hearing unique perspectives from various leaders representing constituents at different places in the world. And first, again, I'm going to ask my colleagues here on the panel just to do a little personal intro. If you could share your name, your affiliation, and perhaps something that you're excited about today. Deepika, do you want to start?
Thank you, Meghan. Hi, everyone. My name is Deepika. I come from New Delhi in India, but presently I'm based in Germany, in north of Germany. I work at Leuphana University of Lüneburg. It's a university known for sustainability studies in whole of Europe, and we're hopeful that the work of the university also reaches across different parts of the globe. I am based at Institute for Sustainable Development and Learning, which stands for working on bringing the education, the learning on ESD from Global North and Global South together. And I am also pursuing my PhD. I'm looking at youth engagement and youth participation in youth-led and youth-centric social movements. So previously I worked at UNESCO and I was coordinating a youth-led network of organizations working on global citizenship, peace, and prevention of violent extremism against education. So I do have experience of different, several forms of educational work that has emerged within the circles of UNESCO in the past 10 years. And right now I'm coordinating a network of universities. It's called UNITWIN Network on Education for Sustainable Development and Social Transformation. And I'm also leading a very interesting project. It's in pilot phase. It's called Politics for Future. So that's about me. And I'm very excited to be joining this conversation, presenting on Politics for Future later. And nice to see 23 people watching us and hearing us about our work. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. I can't wait to hear more about your work. Just the number of different hats that you currently wear, have worn, will wear in the future is incredibly impressive. Addise, how about you? If you can just share where you're from, your affiliation, and something you're excited about.
Hello, good evening, good morning, and good day for you. My name is Addise, and I am based in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. I work for the Ethiopian Graduate School of Theology, which is a higher educational institution established by religious establishments in Ethiopia to serve church and society in Ethiopia and beyond. My role is serving as head of development and communications, bringing academic teaching, research, and community engagement in interdisciplinary approach, and also mostly focusing on community engagement aspects, taking research and academic teaching to the communities and churches and religious institutions. We are also very much excited to be partners of York University and Leuphana University in Education for Sustainable Development. We are currently coordinating College of Teacher Education and theological seminaries to focus on education for sustainable development. So it is a continuation of our engagement in the past in education for sustainable development, because the religious aspect is more or less neglected, and I'll be talking about that particularly.
Addise, what's one thing you're excited about? About
this session?
About anything. Could be like what you're going to eat for dinner.
No, I am feeling to sleep, but I am very awake to be part of this discussion because it is closer to midnight now.
Oh, I'm so sorry that I even brought up dinner when you're ready for bedtime. I'm so grateful for you being here, Addise. I cannot wait to hear more about the hats that you wear and your expertise that you're bringing to today's panel. Sebastian, if you could share with us your intro, that would be great, and what you're excited about.
Thanks very much, Megan. My name is Sebastian Berger. I work as the head of secretariat for the Global Student Forum. The Global Student Forum is a recently established organization, was founded in 2020 by the largest pre-existing regional continental student federations of school and university students in Europe and Africa, Latin America, Asia. And we are based here in Brussels. I'm an Austrian originally, but I got here to Belgium through my prior role as Vice President of the European Students' Union. So I've been working with student unions for quite some time now. With the GSF, we are trying to fill the gap that existed since basically the Cold War times, where students did not have a democratic structure to represent their interests towards the international community. I'm excited about the 17th of November. It's International Student Day, where we commemorate the massacre of the Nazis in Prague, and basically all of the struggles that students are still engaged in when it comes to fighting for social justice and democracy.
A timely day for this conference to happen at the same time. So thank you for being here, Sebastian. Can't wait to hear more from you. And at this time, folks, I just want to welcome everyone. I appreciate you folks putting who you are in the chat. We have such a variety of folks joining us from around the world today, and really happy to be together in this, not exactly a Zoom room, but it's similar to a Zoom room. So first off, we're going to hear a bit more about Deepika's work. So Deepika, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you, Megan. Catherine, can you share my presentation, please? Yes. So I'm going to talk about youth in policy as a very important means, as a very important end to sustainable and inclusive learning. And I'm also going to talk about why are we exactly engaging with young people. I see there is a lot of youth audience, so I don't need to get into details, but I'm sure it will what I'm going to present will resonate with all of you. Catherine, next slide, please. So I want to touch upon the key features of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which is universal, integrated approach, national ownership by all the member states of United Nations, transformative nature of the Sustainable Development Goals, rights-based, leaving no one behind, focus on people, and new global partnerships. So these are the pillars on which the SDGs, the Agenda for 2030, has been built and has been based upon, and will also be evaluated. Next slide, please. So when we say that leave no one behind, what exactly do we mean? And since I'm coming from the space of youth, a person who has also emerged from the rank of youth leadership, a person who is evaluating youth social movements, and a person who is closely looking at the youth tokenism in the youth engagement at international and national policy space, I certainly would like to bring the perspective of how young people need to be engaged and how young people are engaging in sustainability and what are the premises for this engagement. The central principle of 2030 agenda says that no one should be left behind, and which means for all the nations, people of all ages and all societies. The universal state nature of the Agenda 2030 entails that youth should be considered across all goals and target. Youth are specifically mentioned in 4 areas, though we do not have the word youth in the SDGs, but youth employment, adolescent girls, education, and sports for peace are the areas where largely we see young people or the youth agenda is located. If I could have you write in the chat as to where do you see the youth agenda located in the SDGs, please feel free and write that in the chat across all the 17 sustainable development goals where you feel young people are, have an agenda for themselves in the SDGs. It could be employment, decent work. It could be education. It could be sustainable consumption. It could be partnerships. So where do you feel the youth agenda or topics that are relevant for youth concerns are located in SDGs? It shall be great if you could please write that in the chat. Next slide, please. So I don't really want to go into specifics of how are we understanding young people, but largely we see there is a Western domination of the understanding about young people and youth, which largely is defined how UN has taken up the definition of young people of persons in the age group of 15 to 24 years. But at the same time, we also understand that youth is not a homogeneous category. First of all, from statistical point of view, young people also includes children, which are persons from the age of 0 to 18 years of age. It also includes adolescents, which includes people from the age of 10 to 19. And then it also includes young people, which is kind of also, in both the adolescents as well as the youth from 10 to 24 years of age. So we do see that there is a lot of, diversity in how young people are also understood across the spectrum of the kind of work that is happening. Secondly, most importantly, the definition of how a country or the youth policy of a country defines youth largely also depends upon the historical and the cultural past and the legacy of the colonialism. So we see that there is a trend in the developing countries that the upper age limit of young people, even in certain situations, extends up to 40 years of age. So in some countries, we can have a young person being defined as 18 to up to 40. And now we see there is a trend that the upper age limit of young people, how they're defined, is being reduced. Of course, primarily be driven by the economic and financial constraints, and also the pressure and the accountability of the government to do something for the young people if they still leave the maximum age limit open, after 35 years of age. So we see that there are concerns, very typical specific concerns that we see when we talk to young people or when we work with young people or young people express. Access to employment, access to quality education, access to health services, access to safe delivery, especially for young girls, and also aspirations, how are young people aspiring to be, and what political agency do young people feel for themselves that their political system allows them to have. So there is a lot of diversity in how young people are defined in different cultural, historical, national, regional context, and therefore that guides the location of the youth agendas differently in different policies across the globe. As I've written here that, WHO defines young people, describes those in 15 to 24 years group as youth, though it is also ambiguously refers to everyone in 10 to 24 years, which typically also mean young people. So we cannot define, when we talk of youth, we interchangeably use the term young people, but let's understand that these are slightly different these are slightly different concepts. Next slide, please. I would also, Catherine, can you go back to the previous slide? it might also be good for the audience to write in, how does your country, if you're logging in from different parts of the world, how does your country define young people? And how do you think young people are placed in the agenda of sustainability, especially from the youth perspective? So it might be good to know if there are any opinions here, if you know how your country is defining a young person. Yes, please. Next slide, Catherine. So why are we talking of youth engagement? I'm sure, as I said, there is a huge youth audience here. I'm sure you will all resonate. Maybe I can already have some answers as to why do you think young people need to be involved in sustainable development goals, or in the agenda setting, or in the policy paradigms and policy processes. So can I have some answers here? If anyone from the audience would like to add as to why do we need to engage young people meaningfully? Next slide, please. Young people or youth forms a 6% of the world's population. This means that youth are a key demographic collectively suffering from global problems. As per 2016 ICRW fact sheet, about 85% of the world's youth live in poor countries. Many lack access to quality education. Over 70% young people are unemployed worldwide, and most lack access to quality healthcare or wash services, water and sanitation, hygiene services. So the world's problem are the youth's problem. There is also a trend that young people are also increasingly defined as youth bulge. So these are also some of the terms that are attributed to how young people are largely understood, primarily because the population of young people is increasing. So we need to move away from this paradigm as seeing them something, that a bulge that needs to be addressed, rather than as a category of population that is meaningfully contributing to the development of the society as a whole. Youth are a tremendous source of potential if they can be harnessed the right way. Youth is the most well-connected generation at any given point of time in the present days, most digitally and tech-savvy generation. And therefore, youth become present and tomorrow's leaders. There is also a narrative that we talk about young people assuming some role in the near future, whereas we largely forget that young people have finally arrived. And these are the leaders of present and not just the leaders of tomorrow. Next slide, please. Meghan, please let me know how much time I have. So so what exactly are we doing? Now we know that how young people are defined in national policy frameworks. We know that we have to and we must work with young people in setting the agenda for sustainability. So how are we doing it? At Leuphana University, we are working with 5 other universities, which includes York University, as part of a network. It's called UNITWIN, UNESCO Chair Network on Education for Sustainable Development and Social Transformation. And the network focuses primarily on research, policy development, and implementation of ESD at all levels of education, specifically regarding a global perspective on ESD and teacher education. So this is a network which brings together universities. We have 6 universities in the core group, and we have about 35 universities from different parts of the world working on research, policy development, and implementation of ESD. Next slide, please. So you must be wondering, how is this teacher education network connected to youth engagement? And you also see a term written here, politics for future. So UNITWIN network has recently started a project. It's called Politics for Future, which is aimed at building capacities of pre-service teachers who are youth, who are young people themselves, on political education, ESD, and global citizenship education. This course discusses the significance of studying politics in education and how it mediates the development of youth teacher trainees as global citizens. So we have added one more layer when we are talking about teachers. We are looking at pre-service training of teachers and building their capacities on political education, ESD and GCED towards achieving Sustainable Development Goal Target 4.7. Next slide, please. So this is the project, Politics for Future. As you see, these are the logos of the partners: York University, Heidelberg University of Education in Germany, Earth Charter at University for Peace in Costa Rica, Rhodes University in South Africa, and University of Crete in Greece, and Leuphana University here. And it is under the UNESCO Chairs UNITWIN program. Next slide, please. So what is the premises? I mean, I do not want to read the entire text, but there is a lack of learning material aimed at understanding the role of political education towards creation of a just, sustainable, and peaceful world, the key idea central to the discourse of global citizenship and ESD. So there is a lack of material, there is a lack of literature which suggests how political education connects to GCED and ESD, and we want to plug this gap with this project. We want to contribute to SDG 4.7 by building a generation of youth teacher trainees, young teacher trainees with the necessary, who are equipped with the necessary competencies to act towards achieving them. What are the 4 goals? Develop common understanding of key concepts of ESD, GCED, and political education. Foster awareness on individual and collective worldviews regarding global citizenship, ESD, and so on. Develop abilities to implement key competencies and enhance the teacher's capacity as agents for transformative change. So largely, this project is bringing political education together with global citizenship and education for sustainable development, and hence the term politics for future. And we are building the capacities, working with the youth teacher trainees on key concepts. And a very important part of the project is it is also informed by a youth advisory. Though due to lack of funds, we were not able to expand the scope of the youth advisory to beyond Germany. But we have 7 young people from Germany who are advising us on each and every stage of the project. Next slide, please.
And probably about a minute or two, Deepika.
Yes. A minute. Yes. That's it. Thank you.
Amazing. Well done. That was incredibly quick reaction there. Deepika, thank you so much. You have given us such thought-provoking questions and ideas to consider. I was going to write in the chat, I think there needs to be youth engagement in all of the SDGs. But I'll look forward to more exploration around that, as well as other aspects of youth and policy, youth and advancing SDGs and sustainable development once we get to the Q&A section. But now up, we're going to hear from Addise. Addise, if you could share your slides, that would be awesome. Or I guess Katrine's going to share slides. You're up, Addise.
Yeah, I'll use myself, yeah, if that's possible. Hello?
Yeah, you said you're going to share slides?
Yeah, I think it is difficult to share, but I'll speak from my screen.
Sure.
Yeah. So my focus is on the issue of faith in sustainable and inclusive education programs, because this is one of the areas neglected, or due to lack of literacy from the religious community or from the scientific community and development practitioners with regard to the role of faith in sustainable development. That was in a debate in the academic world, because religion is sometimes used as an instrument, or sometimes even it doesn't matter for societal development once secularization and so on and so forth will be achieved. And now that is not true in reality. So sustainable and inclusive learning, for me and for the religious communities, mean to address a holistic approach to education that tries to meet all-rounded learning by combining all needs of a person, be it spiritual, physical, emotional, mental, and all holistic approach to education. And that is key in defining what sustainable and inclusive learning means in this context, in the faith context. And that, in concrete terms, means providing equal opportunities for different segments of the population. Like at the Ethiopian Graduate School of Theology, we have equal opportunities for women and men, for able and disabled people, for rural, urban, for religious secular. So this is key for ensuring sustainable and inclusive development in the SDGs and beyond. Now, what is happening over the few years is now a challenge is emerging with COVID and instability and global challenge is that the mode of education needs to consider also a hybrid approach to delivery method, like education in person or in remote, by using technology and infrastructure in different approaches. And that sometimes is behind for theological education systems, religious education systems, into the overall learning process and partnerships in SDGs, because this is for a long time a gap, as we see in research, and I'll touch upon that later. And now the challenge is how to include SDG goals into the curriculum at different levels, and that is a huge issue, especially for theological religious education programs, because these educational systems also get to serve church and society, or religious communities and society, and they are always in the community serving in different ways, but they are not part and parcel in MDGs and SDGs. In fact, now things have changed. So the curriculum needs to address that. The research agenda should address that. Community engagement approach, practical field education programs needs to address those challenges. And that, by implication, is really one of the philosophical issues in education. It is how are we going to balance theoretical principles and library education, desk education systems into the practical day-to-day life approach, because each and every SDG has a meaning on day-to-day life for a girl, for a woman, for a man, for a farmer. So how can we interpret that into a reality in the community? And that is one thing that higher educational learning establishments need to address. So to give you an example from the Ethiopian Graduate School of Theology, when the pandemic COVID-19 was in May, so there was a huge challenge because education was in person, in classroom, and then taking that back to the student was a very challenging moment because of technological challenge and also infrastructural issues, travel problems, mobility issues, also instability problems. So that has brought a huge challenge for higher education, especially for religious education systems and theological programs. And then it was decided that the classroom needs to go to the student, be it in a home or in a region or in a village. So that was a huge challenge in developing country contexts like the Ethiopian system. And added to that is also economic and financial challenge for students to access education for high level, and especially for girls' education. It was very challenging. And the question now for higher education institutions is how to motivate students to achieve sustainable and inclusive way of learning. One point here we are focusing is on awareness creation on sustainable development goals. How can we address those in curriculum, like issues in sustainable development, fairness and sustainable development, and so on and so forth, social protection and education for lifelong. And this needs to be included in the theological curriculum and also in other higher educational curriculum. And in research also, it is very vital that theology development nexus needs to be studied very well and disseminated to different stakeholders, because that is also a huge gap in research as we see it. It is not interdisciplinary. The religious element is missing oftentimes. And there is a South-North gap also in research, because the South is not as producing research for the global community, and it is behind. That also requires a special attention. And again, the religious aspect is still not strong in the education system as we see it. And skills and lifelong learning is very important in this process. So engaging students in higher education in economic, in social and environmental dimensions with particular emphasis to religious dimension is vital as we progress to achieve SDGs in partnership with global community. And now the strategy to achieve that is how can we really make use of hybrid learning programs or take education to the student. And that is a huge challenge for many contexts where there is huge challenge of infrastructure like electricity, ICT applications, and so forth. So that needs really a special attention in many parts of the globe and especially in the South. And making education hybrid is very different and very important at different levels, at national level, maybe at global level, and also at local level, because we cannot achieve really SDGs by neglecting those larger population, like Deepika is mentioning, like youths who are in the village, who are in the elementary school or secondary education system, and all those teachers need really this type of approach to be part of the global learning system. And finally, what I would like to really make an issue for us to focus is how can we improve SDG awareness for higher education systems, especially in theological schools, because theological schools are not really much aware of SDG issues in their curriculum, research, and community engagement. And how can we improve education for sustainable development in teachers' professional development programs, engage students, that all and each SDGs are related to daily life of a person, a student, a teacher, and a farmer and a housewife. And making education also more practical, more grassroots level, more problem solving is important, including by addressing the faith dimension into it and contextualizing, especially for those higher education institutions in the South who didn't really make education more contextual, more relevant to their context is very important. So the question now for us is, how can we give flesh to sustainable development goals in line with the role of faith communities globally and locally? Thank you.
Thank you, Addise. I mean, some of the questions that you just posed and the perspective that you shared has me thinking SDGs and beyond, as you said, the reality of the challenges that, I mean, COVID really just brought to the surface that had been alive before then, but mobility challenges, the fact that, as you said, bringing the classroom to the student, recognizing all different types of learners, and as you said, also recognizing that there's various levels that we need to be considering in terms of advancing the SDGs, definitely at the global level, but also at the local level. And even local can mean something different. Region, your community on a local level could be very different. So in any event, I really appreciate that. And I think there's a lot more for us to explore there. But first, we need to hear from Sebastian. So Sebastian, over to you.
Yes, thank you. I'm just trying to pull up the slides.
Cool.
There we go. Chrome tab. All right. You should be able to see my slides now. Yes?
All good.
Very good. So I'm going to first apologize to Professor Hopkins and everyone who was basically at the IAU conference. Katrin, I don't know how many people are there. I gave a very similar kind of presentation there, but I thought it fits quite well with the overall topic that we have, talking about sustainable and inclusive learning. And I want to present a bit the perspective of the international student movement. I had the chance to introduce our organization before, but just so you have a bit of an idea of the landscape, the founding organizations, and at this point, the membership ranges at 122 countries with 202 both secondary and tertiary student unions. The main question, what kind of transformations are needed in order to achieve more sustainable and inclusive learning, was also very much at the heart of a large-scale consultation that we have been undergoing early this year in the scope of the World Higher Education Conference, where we had national student union delegations from 90 countries coming together to reflect about the future that they want to see. The outcomes of these regional consultations were then further consulted within a working group of national and regional student leaders, elected student leaders, to come to a conclusion which is, kind of articulated in the Global Student Declaration. And you have a QR code here on the screen if you want to have a look. It's quite a big document with 80 policy suggestions, so I won't be able to touch upon all of them, but I would like to frame some of the key issues and also present some suggestions as we see that relate to a more sustainable and inclusive and equitable approach to higher education. Many of them might seem standard, and you have potentially heard them before, but unfortunately they also remain under-delivered in many of the contexts that our own unions are operating in. The main issues that were raised can basically be summarized under 3 of these existential crises that we are facing societally. Looking at climate change, the IPCC's latest report is very clear that we are heading for mass extinction of species, including our very own, by the destruction of vast habitats and the livelihoods of millions of people. And the most vulnerable are paying the highest price, even though they're in the worst position to adapt to the impact of climate change. And developed nations continue to fail. We've seen this, if you're following COP27 in Egypt, to phase out fossil fuels fast enough. The second very much interlinked dimension with this is a crisis of access and scarcity of immoral and unimaginable wealth concentrated in the hands of a very few, while billions struggle to make ends meet and live a different dignified life, both within the domestic frame, if you look at domestic economies, but also within an international system that keeps reproducing staggering inequalities and poverty through extractivism, through austerity policies, and through a deeply biased financial architecture. And the last dimension relates to the unprecedented backlash that we have seen on democracy in recent years. Authoritarian leaders and oppressive forms of government go through a renaissance at the moment in many parts of the world, and student unions and students often stand at the front line when it comes to pushing back against such governments and fighting for the protection of civil liberties, fundamental freedoms, and human rights against the backdrop of those who want to see them abolished for their own interests. The question is, in all of this, what is the role of higher education? What is the role of learning? If we look at climate change and the environmental catastrophe, education, I think we can agree, is among the most powerful tools to bring forward impactful change. And we believe that it's a foundational responsibility of higher education specifically to develop effective solutions for the most pressing issues of our time and educate a new generation of learners to become capable of creating more equitable, inclusive societies and futures on the local and national, but also on the international level. Now, we look at the funding of higher education institutions in order to produce the necessary research, in order to contribute to coming up with solutions that help the private and the public sector to implement solutions that protect the environment and the planet. They need to be publicly and well funded. We also believe that education for sustainable development, and was said by colleagues before, needs to be taught across curricula. We cannot start with higher education. It needs to be all the way from kindergarten basically up to your PhD. We cannot talk about quality education at this point of the crisis without that component. And I agree with the colleague before that educators need to be provided with the skills and with the capacities to integrate climate and sustainability into teaching and learning, including a focus on lifelong learning, to be ready to provide upskilling opportunities aimed at those who will need to undergo the transition from unsustainable to more greener jobs. And another important factor, I think, in higher education is the role model function. Higher education needs to practice what it preaches in regards to climate change and sustainability. But unfortunately, we see that only very few higher education institutions have so far stepped up their game and joined the Race to Net Zero campaign, which is 3% of higher education institutions worldwide. So we need a multidimensional approach from teaching and learning to operations, but also when it comes to investments of higher education institutions to put up the efforts together that can mitigate the impact of the crisis at this point of time. Now, if we look at the inequality perspective and inclusiveness of higher education. And I'm going to quote Professor Hopkins, as I did a few weeks ago in Dublin. Globally, only 6% of people attend university, but they take up to 80% of all leadership positions. That means higher education is opportunity, it's social mobility, and it's a tool to shape society. However, as we all know, it remains a privilege that a large majority of people still do not have access to. And coming from a belief that unjust economic and political realities are upheld by unrepresentative and unfair allocation of power within a society, equitable access, inclusive education can shift that power and transform socioeconomic realities. So therefore, we believe that higher education and learning opportunities must be made accessible to anyone, no matter what kind of background, disregarding any kind of discrimination, may it be through religious, gender, race, sexual orientation. So we need a rights-based approach that allows minorities, including political, ethnic, and religious minorities, migrant and refugee communities, and indigenous people to obtain higher education. And I think flexible pathways, recognition of prior qualifications, affirmative action, and targeted subsidies are key in order to break down socioeconomic barriers for these groups. And we also need to remodel curricula to have a stronger linkage with employment, with entrepreneurship and skills and vocational training in order to make it more accessible and more interesting for students from diverse backgrounds to access higher education. And last but not least, our education systems need to be decolonized and indigenized to include local sensitivities, traditions, cultures, and critical workflows. And by incorporating these previously marginalized pedagogies and voices, higher education can create an environment, an inclusive environment that allows more people to question persisting imperial political practices and the appropriation of resources and labor from the global south to sustain an illusion of everlasting economic growth within the Western world. The third and last dimension I want to touch upon relates to democracy fundamentally. Higher education institutions have throughout history been places where critical thinking is developed, even in hostile political and institutional environments. And we see that right now in Iran, where students and academics are leading the revolution. At its core, I think sustainable higher education needs to empower learners to become active citizens, exercising self-determination and engaging in civic discourse. But to allow this, we need to ensure that academia is safeguarded from freedom, from interference on their freedom, academic freedom, but also from cultural and economic censorship on imposition, as we see it in so many countries nowadays, no matter where in the world you're looking. And I think something that is often not stressed enough is that we also need to be vigilant that higher education and learning does not become complicit in reproducing authoritarian societies and suppressing the freedom of expression and freedom of thought. That also relates to what the colleague said in the first presentation, the meaningful engagement of young people. In the field of higher education, we prefer to relate to young people as students. I understand not all students are young people, but predominantly. A collegial approach to higher education must take the concerns and aspirations of all groups within the academic community into account and facilitate access to relevant decision-making spaces for the democratically elected representatives of all of these groups. Only when students, departments, faculty, staff, rector recognize that sharing the governance of a higher education institution is a common responsibility can the vital deliberations and the strategic foresight take place that leads to the best decisions in the interest of every group. So establishing that the meaningful participation of democratic elected student representatives in higher education policy and governance must be regarded as a pivotal building block of institutional democracy, and also thinking broadly about how we want to structure our society can only work through participative democracy. I'm gonna close. I think I'm reaching my time limit. What we want to see when thinking about sustainable and inclusive higher education is public funded free quality education that is accessible to all. It's a future of education in which higher education institutions empower students and learners to become active citizens, critical thinkers with compassion for their fellow human beings and the planet. And it's a future in which the higher educational community undergoes every possible effort to turn the tide on climate change so that the generations after us have a future at large. So the transformations to get to that point where we have truly sustainable and inclusive education are costly, they are complex, systemic, but I think it's very clear that we can't continue in the same way as we do when thinking through education. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sebastian. I would just say that I really appreciate you sharing sort of the realities of the challenges that we're facing. In addition, sort of echoing what I heard from Addise of the important role of higher education. I mean, Deepika spoke to that too in terms of the importance of the youth voice, but also I appreciate you sharing sort of the significance of approaching sustainability holistically and recognizing that, especially within higher education, while operating our buildings more efficiently is critically important. Also, what happens inside the classroom is really important. As a board member used to say, let's make sure that an institution's worst emissions aren't its graduates. So in any event, really appreciate all of those thought-provoking presentations. And we do have several questions coming from our audience members. I'm going to try to get to several of them here. I guess, firstly, perhaps this is something that each of you could speak to. And Deepika, maybe we can start with you. How do you suggest we overcome language barriers when it comes to the internationalization of global learning?
I think we really need to speak at the level of students, because I mean, teaching here at Leuphana University, where we have international students and also predominantly German-speaking students, really making it jargon-free, speaking at the level of the students, understanding different needs, linguistic needs of the students, because we have all diverse students in the classroom. So really acknowledging the different linguistic needs of the audience, of the participants, and secondly, also engaging them in the conversation. Language becomes a great invisibilizing factor. So hearing all the voices equally, democratically, and then giving them space, I think would be one of the feature. And yes, speaking less of jargons and more relatable language.
Thank you, Deepika. And Addise, I'll ask you the same question and then add to it. Do you want to add anything else to Deepika's thoughts about how do we overcome language barriers when it comes to the internationalization of global learning?
It will be very difficult to achieve, really, because country context and also UNESCO principles sometimes also really might contradict, because each student and each learner should speak from his or her own language, and that really makes something self-contradictory somehow. But still, there are ways of really with the major common language, global language like many people speak across different parts of the globe, and that might really bring together, and the willingness to learn other languages is also very important, really. Here it is not really a self-centered language advocacy, but how are we also open to learn other languages, which really carries knowledge and wisdom. It is not about really large population speaking this language or that language, So it requires openness from all sides.
Really appreciate that. Sebastian, did you want to add anything?
I think Deepika and Addise answered it really well. I think when we talk about learning mobilities, and obviously Europe is quite privileged with the Erasmus program, I do think that it's really important to offer language courses free of charge. That is one way to really bring internationalization home. But I agree that diversity of language is a strength and should not be a barrier to internationalization.
Awesome. Appreciate that. Addise, for you, can you speak to the impact of wealth inequality or privilege on people's access to international opportunities? How can we assure that everyone, regardless of their social or economical background, has this kind of access? Thoughts?
Yes, definitely. That is obvious, because that is one of the SOTG goals, to ensure inequality at all levels. At country level, individual level. So let us take academic access and quality education for the majority, maybe like for girls or for the vulnerable population. And that is a huge challenge because, okay, Sebastian said, okay, free education. It really is education free, especially higher education is not free. And it is very difficult, you know, you cannot ensure that. And take research. Maybe only 1% of the South is contributing to research, and all the research infrastructure and all the control is maybe by the North. And can you ensure in such a way that there will be universal education and globalization and internalization of education? And I doubt. And take also mobility. How many students can really have visas to go to one country to another country, you know, in this unjust system, which is really regulated by the economic system, instead of really the opportunities and things that you are able to see. So it is really very, very challenging situation in reality on the ground.
Absolutely. Deepika, Sebastian, would you like to add anything to that?
I would just like to say that, yeah, I mean, I agree with what Addise is saying, but clearly scholarships, especially more for very vulnerable population, I think can really boost participation of students from different parts of the world. I sometimes refrain to say global South, but maybe I can use it here, maybe from different parts of the globe to come and experience education. Also, there is a trend that we see from students from this side of the world also going to other countries to learn. So, I mean, and I am not a big fan of digital learning because you don't live the cultural experience. So it's not an immersive experiential experience for the students. So lots and lots of scholarships and corporate responsibility. I think it will be nice to see if corporates are also taking some ownership in building students and youth from different parts of the globe interact with each other. Yeah.
Sebastian, you spoke on your last slide about free higher education. Any thoughts on this?
Yeah, first, I wanted to come in on what Deepika was saying in regards to the immersive experience of mobility. There's a huge discussion going on now post-COVID in Europe about internationalization from home, digitalization, Erasmus, basically, and commission officials speak very bluntly about the fact, well, this is a wonderful opportunity for all those students who cannot afford the real thing. I think we need to be very careful in how we are framing this discourse. In regard to access to higher education, I think I'm not sure if corporates and their social engagement are the solution to this. I think corporate paying fair taxes, stopping tax evasion, and putting money into the system that would allow the state to pay scholarships is the solution to that. And if you look at, for example, the Global South, at the Transforming Education Summit, a very, very strong action track on finance, most sub-Saharan countries are spending more on servicing their debts to donors, private donors, and Global North countries than they spend on education, and not only higher education, but the whole education sector. So it's a deeply flawed system. And I think it's a political question of what you prioritize and how you solve these issues. So I think, and there is no easy solution to that, but the money is there.
Thanks, Sebastian. So another question, and Deepika, perhaps we can start with you. How to include youth in decision-making spaces as political chambers and so on? You spoke about this several. Any other thoughts here? I
think it will be good to acknowledge it will be good to start with the acknowledgement that not all young people can contribute in all the processes in how policies are implemented or designed. There are several ways in which young people can contribute. So we need to decide where is the interest really lying, whether at advocacy or at just seeking information, acting based on the information you have, mobilizing or channelizing other people. Secondly, we need a great buy-in from the administration itself. And also also the change in the language, like, working with young people, or rather putting young people at the heart of setting their own agenda. So it also involves a paradigm shift as to what do we really mean by youth participation, because in many times it ends up as a tokenistic measure. So change in the narrative, how youth participation is largely perceived would be the second point. Yeah.
I really appreciate those points. Thank you, Deepika. Addise, did you want to add anything here? How to include youth in decision-making spaces?
Yes, I think that should be very concrete, you know, unless otherwise you put in decision, you are talking about decision making, and that decision making is from top to bottom. And in that composition of decision makers, you can analyze, you know, in our trainings, we say, okay, 50% emerging youth leaders needs to be in the decision making, or 50 plus women should be in the decision making. If you don't really have that yardstick, it is something on the air, you know. You talk about youth, everyone is talking about youth. But if you don't really pinpoint to that composition of decision making in the boardroom, or in somewhere where decision is being made, and they should be there.
Yep. Sebastian, your thoughts on meaningful engagement of youth?
Well, I think meaningful engagement, we can only refer to engagement as meaningful if the engagement has any impact on the actual decisions that are made. But not only that, I think coming from a movement that is deeply rooted in democratic structures, in self-organizing, in accountability, in being elected by a constituency and having a mandate, many of the youth engagement models that we see in the international system, and that very much relates to what the United Nations and UNESCO is doing, is far from that. It's not, even in the education space, it's not learners electing their representatives to then go into these spaces and act upon agreed policies, but it's a top-down selection. It's cherry picking of youth that fit into specific boxes. We see a lot of window dressing, and I think now, after having spent now 2 years in trying to bring democratic organizing into the education space, a bit more commitment to see that as valuable. But it's much easier for people in power to pick those young people that do not criticize them, do not have the skills, that do not have the mandate and the constituency behind them to have any meaningful impact. It's wonderful to have cheerleaders that go home and put that into the CV, that they were at that and that conference, and everyone's happy. That's not how it works. I think when we talk about meaningful engagement, it needs to be people that come from youth-led organizations and that are accountable to their peers.
Thank you, Sebastian. And I think we're just about at time. So if I may just try to wrap us up with a little bit of a summary, it'll be very brief, but I think you each have given us really interesting ideas and considerations in the context of sustainable and inclusive internationalization and inclusive global learning. What I would say is I think we heard about the challenges. Sebastian, you laid out sort of the realities that we're facing as a result of climate change, the inequities that exists within higher education and sustainability and beyond. Addise, you spoke about mobility challenges, accessibility challenges, the need to be considering all types of learners. And Deepika, you spoke about the need for youth engaged in a variety of different ways. And you gave some really thought-provoking questions, I think, to the audience here around where can the youth contribute to the SDGs? I still think it's in every single one of them. And I think you also spoke about the, I just lost my train of thought. Deepika, there was one other thing I was going to say about what you brought forward. Youth and policy agents. And Sebastian, you just said that as well, is how are we making sure that students and youth see themselves as the people in a few years that can be making policy decisions. So in any event, I know we're over time. I apologize for that. But I am so grateful to Deepika, Addise, and Sebastian for sharing your knowledge, your expertise with us today. I'm grateful to everybody for joining us, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of this conference. Go forth and be sustainable and inclusive.